this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about the basics of WordPress and how you can get started with understanding the components. So first of all, there are two types of installations, and you should know the difference. One type is going to be WordPress.com. It looks like this, and this is not what we're going to be doing in this class. WordPress.com, just so you know, is not self-hosting. What it is you basically pay for them to host WordPress on their website. You don't have control over the installation and all of the back-end stuff in quite the same way in terms of the database and all of that. So this is not the self-hosted solution. This is not what we're going to be doing. This is a less professional version. It doesn't mean that it's not as good for people who are just getting started, but it is definitely not something that you would do, say, for your clients. This is going to be what WordPress.org looks like, and WordPress.org is what we're going to be using to download WordPress and install it. And so that's referred to as self-hosting, just so you understand that. We are going to self-host WordPress. And WordPress, once you install it, it has two parts, and we've sort of discussed this before. There's the file system, which contains the PHP, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, and then there's the MySQL database, and this should look like a familiar setup. So on the left is an example of what the file system would look like with all of those HTML, PHP, CSS, and JavaScript files. And those files are going to have the instructions on sort of what is supposed to happen in terms of database installation, and also the template pieces and parts that have conditional logic in them and so forth. And then on the right is a snapshot of PHPMyAdmin, which is an interface to the MySQL database. So the database is the second component where all of the data is stored. This is supposed to be a reiteration for you based on the things that you have probably watched already. So after the installation and setup for your self-hosted WordPress installer, what you're going to do is log into the backend WP admin panel. All right, and when you first log in, you're going to see this dashboard, and probably already seen all of this as the basic introduction whenever I was showing you how to set everything up. So this shouldn't be that unfamiliar. And part of the dashboard also is when you hover over or you select the dashboard, you'll see on the left that also we have the link to the updates. And then you can locate content entry types that are grouped beneath the dashboard. And the content entry types are posts, pages, media, and comments. And you can locate tools that configure and manage your site's layout, user access, and technical settings below the content creation links. These default configuration areas are going to be appearance, plugins, users, tools, and settings. And just so you know, beneath each one of those things are lots of sublinks, but we'll go over that later. And then anything that's sort of below that configuration area, those are going to be where sometimes like certain kinds of plugins or widgets, mostly plugins, are going to show up. In this example, you can see that there's a plugin that has a special feature in that side panel for WP example content plugin. So get an idea of the way that looks. Okay, and also up here in the top left, you're going to see this home icon, and it's going to have the name of what you've called your website. And it's going to have a little icon link in the top of that toolbar, and it's going to toggle you back and forth between the admin backend screen and the landing page of the website that visitors see. And so this is kind of, if you were to toggle it, you would see this front end, and while logged in, the toolbar is going to stay persistent at the top of the viewport, so you can quickly customize aspects of the site with the customize button, or view comments with the comments button, add new content, modify your user's profile over there on the right, log out on the right, or you can jump back to the WP admin panel's dashboard. All right, and some plugins that you install later and themes might add other features up in that toolbar as well. Types of WP content. There are going to be post, pages, media, and I have comments in parentheses because they're a little bit different, even though technically they are an entry type. So this is what they correspond to as a reminder in the backend panel, WP admin panel. But really, most of these are technically forms of posts, and you see that I have comments crossed out because you'll see in my next explanation as to why I've kind of crossed that out. Technically, posts, pages, media, and comments are all forms of content entry in the database, but post pages and media are going to be found in a certain table, whereas comments are found in a different one. So let's take a look in PHP admin so we can see the database. You'd want to select the correct database. In my case, it's this one, DB Matt L. Kottner. And then you'll see that there's a list of tables underneath once you've selected the database, and I would want to then go and select the p2 underscore posts, and you'll see that in my notes here I've got it called xx underscore posts because you may have called it something different with your prefix, and that might apply to a different project or something with a different prefix, but it's going to be basically the posts table. And then once that's selected, you're going to get a list over on the right side of all these different records that are stored in that table. And what I want to show you is if I, were to scroll over to the right end of all the different columns, you'll see that there's a column there for the posts table that's called post type. And what I want you to notice about that is that, all of these post types in this column are labeled as something slightly different. So you'll notice that they correspond to the three types of content entry in the WP admin panel that we were talking about before, where we have a post, a page, and in this case, attachment. So attachment's the only one that is called something a little bit different in the database backend than it is in the WP admin panel. So a post type here, if you were to look at this, the post type in this column is going to correspond with the posts in the WP admin panel. Anything called attachment in this column is going to be referred to as media in the WP admin panel. And a page post type is going to be referred to as pages in the WP admin panel. And if we take a peek, you see here that that's how they correspond. So if you kind of wanted to jump back here, you would see how post, page, and attachment correspond to posts, pages, and media. Okay. And then comments are a little bit different because they are found in the comments table of the database. Although they're not really part of the posts family in the database, they are still content entry. And if you wanted to look at this slide where we've just got our database selected, if you look down a couple of tables, you'll see that there's the p2 underscore comments. That p2 underscore comments table is where the comments are actually stored. So what are the differences between these content entry types? Okay, let's start with comments since that was the sort of the oddball, right? It's stored in the comments table we just discussed. Comments are content entries that users make in the comments area of a post entry. So like if there's a post that somebody's created, maybe it's an article of some sort, and then a user is on the page and they want to comment on it, well, a user can go down in the bottom if comments are enabled and they can comment. Anyway, they're responses to posts. They are created by users that are interacting with the site and the front end of the website's interface. And a comment is linked to a specific post through the comment post ID column in the comments table. So, and what that does is it references the ID of the post to which it corresponds. And so if you were to go back and look at PHPMyAdmin, you'd be able to see what I'm talking about. Okay, now let's look at the things that are in the posts table of the database. So media, all right, and remember that's an attachment post type. Media entries, they can be pictures, audio files, video files, and a variety of other types of files, zip, PDF, and so forth. There are some file types that are not allowed. One, for instance, a good one that you might actually want to try to use is called an SVG, or scalable vector graphic, because scalable vector graphics are not binary files the way that, say, a JPEG is a binary file. It's basically just a set of instructions and code for an SVG because it's showing the browser how to draw a vector shape. Well, those can be seen as potentially harmful, and so WordPress by default does not allow SVGs, at least at the time of this video's creation. There are some plugins that you can install that will allow you to upload SVGs, however, so that's just something to consider. Anyway, media, they are attachment post types, as I mentioned. They can be added directly to the media library through the WP admin panel, and they can also be added directly into posts, pages, and comments where attachments are permitted. So whenever you're building a post or a page or a comment, as long as you have access to use the WYSIWYG, stands for what you see is what you get, the WYSIWYG editing tools, then as long as you have access to add pictures and things like that, then you can add those attachments directly. They ultimately go into the media library as attachments, but you can add them straight in through a poster page without having to add them first separately into the media library in order to use. So that's a good thing to know. Posts, okay, and remember it's the post type in the post table. So posts are entries or articles that are generally considered to be time relevant, and they're published in a stream like articles in a newspaper or magazine. It's a time relevant stream of content. So posts can have categories and tags, and they're searchable by both. That's important. Posts can allow users to comment on them, on the content that's in them. Posts will appear in the WordPress default blog page, right? And we'll go over what that means later. Posts will also show the author's name by default in many themes. So that's something that you can disable, but it can be tricky in some themes. And posts can be ordered by and searched by author, date, ID, category, tag, and I think there's supposed to be something else there, but and anything else that's sort of a piece of meta information for the post. Okay, pages. Okay, so a page is referred to as a reminder as the page post type in the posts table. And they are typically meant to be like reasonably stable content within a site. It doesn't change very often. An example would be like a contact page or an about us page or services, things like that. Unlike posts, pages cannot be categorized or tagged, nor is the author name or date created published. Those things are not published whenever you see that page on the screen. You can apply different templates to a page entry, provided that the theme you're using offers them. Okay, so for instance, when you're making a page, you can sometimes, depending on the theme, you can have a right sidebar or a left sidebar, or you can have a full width page or whatever. Okay. Okay, now let's look at posts versus pages a little bit more closely, because that can be really confusing to some people, like when do you use one versus the other? Well, one of the things you want to think about is what they typically represent. So posts typically are timely. They're sortable and archivable. They're often shared. They're often only an image or an image gallery, video, text, or they can be a combination of the above. They can be multiple things put together, but sometimes it's just an image that's a post, you know, sort of almost like an Instagram kind of thing. You know, you just put up a picture and that's it. Maybe you'll say something about it, maybe you won't. And it could be, you know, a good example would be like you can make portfolio items posts, because then you could categorize them. Let's say that you had illustration, web design, and graphic design, or like print media or something like that. Then you could categorize all of your portfolio posts in those categories, and then that way people could search for all of your illustration, and it would only pull up your illustration, for instance. And those are typically going to be time-based, because you're going to constantly be making new work. At least that's the idea in a portfolio, right? Same is going to be true for like articles and things, you know, where it's very, very time-based, and it's based on things being current versus old, right? So there's usually some sort of chronology with posts. They're also often found in sidebar menus based on a sort type, like a date sort or a category sort and so forth. Now pages, they're considered to be static, and they're changed infrequently. They are a permanent fixture that can be consistently found in the same place. All right, that's typically true. Typically, they are found in global menus. So, you know, the menus that will persist on every single page. that's typically going to be a page. So like if you're thinking about, when I create this item, is it important that I have this thing in the global menu? If the answer to that is yes, then it's probably going to be a page type. If the answer is no, then there's a very good chance that that would be a post type. And there, there are no really hard and set fast rules about that, but these are sort of general ideas.